Hi, I'm Ryan, and at my own sister's wedding, my mother looked me dead in the eye and called me an embarrassment to this family. It's amazing how a few words can shatter everything you thought you were fighting for. Have you ever felt like no matter what you did, it would never be enough for the people who are supposed to love you the most? Before I tell you what happened right after she said that, the moment that changed how every single person in that room saw me, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. Believe me, you won't want to miss what happens when a mother's cruel words are silenced by the one thing she could never buy: true honor. My family operates in a world I chose to leave behind. We're from McLean, Virginia, a place where a person's worth is measured in stock portfolios, corporate titles, and the zip code on their driver's license. It's a bubble of old money and new ambition, where success is a very specific, very narrow path. You go to an Ivy League school, you get a job at a top-tier law firm or a Wall Street bank. You marry someone from an equally good family, and you continue the cycle. I broke that cycle. I joined the Navy. To them, it wasn't a noble calling or an act of service. It was a bizarre, almost shameful detour. It was a failure to launch, a public admission that I couldn't cut it in their world. Growing up, I was always the square peg. My sister Olivia was the golden child. She did everything right. Perfect grades, prestigious internships, and a personality that charmed everyone she met. Her achievements were celebrated with lavish parties and announcements in society columns. When I graduated from the Naval Academy, my parents sent a polite 2-sentence email to the extended family. When I was promoted to lieutenant, my mother's only comment was a sigh followed by, "I just hope you're being safe." It was never about pride. It was about managing the inconvenience of having a son who didn't fit their meticulously crafted family image. My uniform wasn't a symbol of honor to them. It was a costume that screamed middle class. The ultimate symbol of my exclusion was my father's watch. It was a vintage Rolex Submariner from the 60s, a beautiful piece he inherited from his own father. It was more than just a watch. It was the family crown, meant for the one who would carry the family's legacy forward. I remember being a kid, watching him wind it every morning, fascinated by the smooth sweep of the second hand. I always dreamed that one day he'd pass it down to me. But a few years ago, during a Christmas dinner, I overheard my mother telling an aunt, "Robert's watch will look so perfect on Olivia's husband someday. A man of his stature deserves something so timeless." It wasn't even a secret. It was a settled fact. The legacy was never meant for me. So when Olivia's wedding day arrived, I knew it would be difficult. The event was being held at our family's estate, a sprawling property with manicured gardens that rolled down to the Potomac River. The driveway was already lined with a parade of high-end German cars, Porsches, Mercedes BMWs, gleaming under the afternoon sun as valets in crisp white shirts rushed to open doors. You could hear the distant, elegant sound of a string quartet tuning their instruments near a massive white tent set up on the great lawn. It was the perfect picture of their world, a world of effortless luxury and carefully curated perfection, a world where I, in my navy dress blues, was a glaring, unwelcome anomaly. I drove myself, pulling my modest Ford behind a brand-new Bentley. As I handed my keys to the valet, I could feel the familiar knot tightening in my stomach. I'd spent weeks debating what to wear. A part of me wanted to just rent a tux and blend in, to make it easier on everyone. But another, stronger part of me refused. This uniform was who I was. It represented years of discipline, sacrifice, and a commitment to something bigger than myself. It was the one thing in my life that I had earned completely on my own, without a cent of my family's money or a single one of their connections. Walking up that stone path, I knew this uniform was my armor, but I also knew they would see it as a weapon. My mother, Catherine, was the first person I saw. She was standing near the entrance, a vision in a custom-made gown, greeting guests with a smile that was both brilliant and brittle. When she saw me, that smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. Her eyes did a quick, dismissive scan of my uniform, from the polished shoes to the ribbons on my chest. There was no warmth, no "I'm so glad you're here." Instead, she glided over, her voice a low, urgent whisper meant only for me. "Ryan, really? You couldn't have just worn a suit. We have guests here from all over the world." It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. I was already a problem she needed to manage. I tried to brush it off, to find my father or my sister, but my mother wasn't done. She followed me as I moved towards the patio, where cocktails were being served. She caught up to me while I was trying to make small talk with a couple who were old family friends. She placed a perfectly manicured hand on my arm, her grip surprisingly tight. She leaned in, her voice now laced with a cold, sharp venom that I knew all too well. It was in front of these people who had watched me grow up, that she delivered the final blow. "You are an embarrassment to this family," she said, her voice low but every word a dagger. Then she turned to her friends, forcing a light laugh as if she'd just told a clever joke. A few of them offered weak, uncomfortable smiles in return. In that moment, everything went silent. The clinking of crystal glasses, the murmur of conversation, the distant music. It all faded into a dull roar in my ears. I just stood there, frozen. I could feel the heat rising in my face, a wave of pure, unadulterated humiliation washing over me. It wasn't just the words. It was the casual cruelty of it, the public execution of any lingering hope I had that things could ever be different. I saw the pity in the eyes of the couple she'd spoken in front of. They quickly looked away, suddenly fascinated by the gardenias. I was completely alone, an outcast at my own sister's wedding. And as my mother walked away without a backward glance, I made a silent decision. I wasn't going to run. I was going to stay and face this, but not on her terms. On mine, I walked away. I didn't run, I didn't storm off. I just turned and walked, one foot in front of the other, my back straight, my gaze fixed on a distant oak tree at the edge of the lawn. Each step felt heavy, like I was wading through thick mud. The sounds of the party seemed to warp and stretch behind me, the cheerful chatter turning into a mocking buzz. I could feel their eyes on my back, a mix of pity and morbid curiosity. It was the longest walk of my life, 100 yards that felt like 100 miles, moving away from the perfectly arranged flowers and the smiling faces, seeking a quiet corner where the weight of that one sentence wouldn't crush me. I just needed to breathe, to find a pocket of air that wasn't poisoned by her contempt, to remind myself that the man she just publicly disowned was not the man I truly was. I found a spot behind a row of sculpted hedges, near the service entrance, where the catering staff were moving about quietly. The contrast was almost comical. On one side of the hedge, a world of champagne, silk, and whispered pleasantries. On my side, the clatter of plates and the smell of cooking fuel. I leaned against the cool stone wall of the house, closing my eyes for a second. An embarrassment to this family. The words weren't just an insult. They felt like a final verdict, a judgment passed down after years of evidence gathering. Every decision I'd ever made that deviated from their master plan, choosing a public university, enlisting, making a career of it, was just another exhibit for the prosecution. This was the sentencing. And the worst part was the chilling finality in her voice. She didn't just believe it. She wanted me to believe it too. My mind flashed back to the day I got my acceptance letter to the Naval Academy. I was so proud I thought my chest would burst. I ran downstairs to show my parents. My father read it, gave me a firm, non-committal handshake and said, "Well, son, that's a choice." My mother didn't even touch the letter. She just looked at me, a strange, sad expression on her face, and said, "But what about law school? Your uncle could have gotten you a summer position at his firm." There was no celebration, no congratulations. It was treated like a strange and unfortunate diagnosis. That day I learned that my achievements would only ever be measured against their expectations, and I would always come up short. Her words today weren't a new wound. They were just salt poured into a very old one, making the past and present burn with the same unbearable fire. Suddenly, a figure appeared around the hedge. It was my father. He was holding 2 glasses of champagne, his expression unreadable. He offered one to me and I just shook my head. He sighed, setting the glass down on a stone ledge. "Ryan," he started, his voice low, "your mother, she's under a lot of pressure today. This event has been a year in the planning." He wasn't looking at me. His eyes were fixed on the sprawling lawn, on the white tent, on the guests mingling under the perfect Virginia sun. He was apologizing for the logistics, for the stress, not for the cruelty. He was managing the situation, not defending his son. In his world, a mother's brutal words were just another variable to control, an unfortunate wrinkle in an otherwise flawless event. It was the most profound form of cowardice I had ever witnessed up close. I just stared at him, waiting for more, for anything that... Sounded remotely like support, but it never came. He took a nervous sip of his champagne, the crystal flute looking fragile in his hand. On his wrist, the Rolex Submariner caught a glint of sunlight. The family crown, the symbol of the legacy I was deemed unworthy of. Just try to enjoy the day for Olivia's sake, he said, still not meeting my gaze. He was asking me to swallow the poison, to pretend it didn't burn, all for the sake of appearances. He was asking me to protect the family image that had just been used to publicly destroy me. He patted my shoulder, a weak, fleeting gesture, and then he was gone, retreating back to the safety of the party, leaving me alone with the second glass of champagne. A silent, bubbly insult. As I stood there, trying to gather the shattered pieces of my composure, my Uncle Frank found me. Frank, my mother's brother, a man who measured life in mergers and acquisitions. He had the same sharp, dismissive eyes as his sister. "There you are," he boomed, clapping me on the back a little too hard. "Hiding from the festivities? Don't tell me all that time on the boats made you shy." He grinned, a predatory flash of white teeth. "So how's the little Navy adventure going? Still getting to play with the big toys?" Every word was a carefully chosen jab, coated in a thin veneer of jovial family banter. To him, my entire career, my life's work, was an adventure, a childish phase I was supposed to grow out of. He was reinforcing the family doctrine. My service was a hobby, not a profession of honor. I gave him a tight, non-committal smile, not giving him the satisfaction of a reaction. "It's going well, Uncle Frank, thanks for asking." My calm response seemed to annoy him. He was looking for a fight, or at least a crack in my armor. He leaned in conspiratorially. "You know, it's not too late. You've got a good head on your shoulders. A Wharton MBA, a few years at my firm. We could make something of you yet. Get you into a real suit." He gestured dismissively at my uniform. And there it was again. The constant, unending judgment. The belief that I was a project to be fixed. A piece of raw material that needed to be molded into their definition of success. He wasn't offering help. He was offering a rescue mission from a life he considered beneath them, beneath him. I finally walked back toward the main gathering, feeling a profound sense of detachment, as if I were watching a movie about someone else's life. The air was thick with unspoken words. I could feel the shift in atmosphere as I approached different groups of guests. Conversations would dip to a whisper, and eyes would dart towards me before quickly looking away. I wasn't a guest anymore. I was a spectacle, the son who had been publicly shamed. I was the living, breathing proof that even in this world of curated perfection, things could get messy. I could see the story forming in their minds, the one they would recount at their dinner parties next week, the tale of Catherine's embarrassing son and his little military costume. I had become the wedding's unfortunate yet fascinating sideshow. Across the lawn I saw her, Olivia, my sister, the bride. She was standing with her bridesmaids, a vision in white, laughing at something one of them had said. Our eyes met for a brief second across the sea of guests. Her smile faltered, just like our mother's had. A flicker of something, guilt maybe, or pity, crossed her face before it was replaced by a practiced bridal radiance. She knew, of course she knew. The news would have traveled through that crowd like wildfire. But she turned away back to her friends, adjusting the veil on her head. In that moment she made her choice. She chose the seamless, perfect day. She chose the path of least resistance. She chose to ignore the public flogging of her own brother to protect her meticulously planned celebration. The silence from her was a betrayal far deeper than my mother's loud cruelty. Then I saw it. The final, brutal confirmation. My father was standing near the grand entrance to the tent with Olivia's fiancé, Michael, a man whose ambition was as polished as his $1,000 shoes. My father was beaming, a proud fatherly smile I hadn't seen directed at me in years. He had taken off the Rolex. He was holding it in his palm, showing it to Michael, explaining the history, the legacy. Michael nodded, his expression one of feigned reverence. I watched as my father gestured towards Michael's wrist, as if measuring it for the future. They were performing the symbolic transfer of power, of legacy, right there in the open. The son had been cast out, and the new, more suitable son was being anointed. It was all happening exactly as my mother had planned. A strange calm washed over me. The burning humiliation in my chest cooled and hardened into something else. Resolve. The pain was still there, but it was no longer a crippling force. It was fuel. I was done. Done trying to earn their love, done hoping for their approval, done playing a game that was rigged from the start. They had drawn the battle lines, and I finally understood that the only way to win was not to fight on their terms, but to stand on my own. I thought of my mentor, Admiral Hayes, a man who carried more honor in his little finger than this entire party combined. He once told me, "True strength isn't about how loud you shout. It's about how quietly you stand your ground when the world is trying to knock you down." I straightened my uniform jacket, adjusted the ribbons on my chest, and started walking toward the ceremony. I wasn't going to hide. I was going to be a witness. The ceremony was set to begin inside the grand tent, a structure that looked more like a permanent ballroom than a temporary shelter. Inside, thousands of white roses and hydrangeas were woven into massive arrangements, their scent thick in the air. Crystal chandeliers, ridiculously opulent for a tent, cast a soft golden light over the rows of chairs draped in white linen. It was a scene of breathtaking expense, designed to impress, to broadcast a message of power and effortless grace. As I walked towards the entrance, I felt like a soldier crossing into enemy territory. My uniform, which felt like a shield outside, now felt like a target. Every polished button, every crisp crease was an affront to their world of soft fabrics and softer morals. I took a deep breath, the scent of roses filling my lungs, and prepared for the next wave. As I neared the draped entrance, I saw my mother again. She was standing with the wedding planner, a woman with a clipboard and a permanently stressed expression, pointing and gesturing with sharp, precise movements. She was a general commanding her troops on the most important day of the campaign. Her eyes, cold and calculating, found me in the crowd. There was no surprise, just a flash of pure, unadulterated annoyance. She saw me not as her son, but as a problem that had reappeared, a logistical snag in her perfect day. She turned to the planner and spoke a few quiet, urgent words. I didn't have to hear them to know their meaning. It was a command to neutralize the threat, to manage the embarrassment, to make me disappear as quietly as possible. A young usher, probably a college kid earning some extra cash, intercepted me with a practiced, polite smile. "Sir, welcome. May I show you to your seat?" He was just doing his job, completely unaware of the familial minefield he'd just stepped into. Before I could even respond, my mother was there, her presence a sudden drop in temperature. She addressed the usher, her voice smooth as silk but with an edge of steel, refusing to even acknowledge me with a glance. "He'll be sitting in the back," she said, a dismissive wave of her hand indicating the general direction of the catering tables. "He might have to leave on short notice. Military business, you know." It was a masterful lie, wrapping her contempt in a plausible excuse, painting me as the one who was transient and unimportant, while simultaneously exiling me. A hot, familiar anger rose in my throat, but I swallowed it down. Making a scene was what she wanted. It would prove her right. It would validate her narrative that I was disruptive, that I didn't belong. So I did the one thing she wouldn't expect. I looked past her directly at the young usher and gave him a calm, respectful smile. "Thank you for the offer, but I can find my own way." My voice was steady, level. I gave him a slight nod, a gesture of man-to-man understanding that completely bypassed her authority. Then, without another word, I walked past them both. I didn't go to the back row she had assigned me. I walked deliberately, with measured steps towards the front rows, towards the seats reserved for the family. I could feel her fury radiating behind me, a silent, scorching heat. I found a single empty chair in the third row, right on the aisle. It was next to a second cousin I hadn't spoken to in a decade. A small, elegant place card with someone else's name was resting on the seat. I picked it up, folded it neatly, and slipped it into my jacket pocket. Then I sat down. The cousin shot me a wide-eyed, panicked look, then quickly turned away, pretending to be intensely interested in the floral arrangements. The whispers started almost immediately, a low hiss spreading through the nearby rows. I didn't need to turn around to know they were all watching. I was a foreign object in their perfectly arranged universe, a glitch in the program. I ignored them all, keeping my back straight, my chin up, and my eyes fixed on the empty altar at the front of the tent. The lights dimmed slightly, and the string quartet shifted from ambient background music to the opening notes of Pachelbel's canon in D. A hush fell over the guests. The show was about to begin. For a fleeting moment, The anger and defiance subsided, replaced by a profound sadness. This was my sister's wedding day, a day I should have been celebrating with uncomplicated joy. Instead, I was sitting here as a symbol of protest, my very presence a source of tension. I wondered if Olivia understood what this was costing me, what it was costing us. Or was she so blinded by the sparkle of the chandeliers and the promise of a perfect life that she couldn't see the brother who was breaking right there in the third row? The procession began. The groomsmen, all looking like they'd stepped out of a catalogue for a Wall Street investment firm, walked down the aisle with practiced ease. Then came Michael, my sister's fiancé. He stood at the altar beaming, a picture of smug satisfaction. As he waited, his eyes scanned the crowd, and for a moment they locked onto mine. There was no animosity in his gaze, nothing so honest. It was something far worse, a look of triumphant pity. It was the look of a man who had won the prize and was glancing back at the runner-up. He had the right career, the right connections, the right future. He was getting the bride, the family's blessing, and the legacy symbolized by the Rolex on my father's wrist. His look said it all. You chose the wrong path, and this is the result. Then everyone stood. The music swelled to its crescendo, and Olivia appeared at the back of the tent, her hand resting on our father's arm. She was undeniably beautiful. The dress, the veil, the flowers, it was all perfect, just as my mother had planned. As they made their slow walk down the aisle, her eyes swept over the guests, a radiant smile fixed on her face. But as she passed my row, that smile faltered. Our eyes met for no more than 2 seconds, but in that brief instant I saw it. I saw the little girl I grew up with, the one who used to tell me her secrets. I saw a flash of guilt, a flicker of regret. She knew this was wrong. She knew I was hurting. But then, just as quickly, the mask of the perfect bride slid back into place. She looked away, her focus returning to the man and the future waiting for her at the altar. My father, however, was a different story. As he reached the front and prepared to give Olivia away, he did something I didn't expect. He paused. His gaze swept over the front rows, over his wife, and then it found me. We looked at each other across the 20 feet of aisle, and the world seemed to fall away. I was ready for the usual disappointment, for the familiar look of weary resignation. But that's not what I saw. For the first time in my life, I saw unambiguous shame in my father's eyes. It was a raw, unguarded moment. He knew my mother's words were cruel and unjust. He knew his silence was cowardice. He knew he had failed me, not just today, but for years. It wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't an apology, but it was an acknowledgement. And in that silent, suffocating tent, that acknowledgement was everything. The officiant cleared his throat and began the ceremony. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today. His voice was a distant drone. My father had taken his seat next to my mother, his face now a stoic, unreadable mask. But the moment had passed between us. The secret was out. My pain was no longer just my own burden. A piece of it now belonged to him. It didn't erase the humiliation or the years of neglect, but it changed the emotional landscape entirely. I was no longer just the defiant son fighting a lonely battle. I was the keeper of a truth that he could no longer ignore. A tiny crack had appeared in the foundation of their perfect family, and I had a feeling that before this day was over, it was going to spread. So I straightened my jacket, my resolve no longer just fueled by anger, but by the quiet certainty that I was on the right side of this silent war. The ceremony felt like it was happening under water. The officiant's words were a muffled drone, a meaningless script that everyone had heard 1,000 times before. I watched Olivia and Michael exchange their vows, their voices clear and steady, perfectly rehearsed. There was no tremble of emotion, no spontaneous tear, just the smooth delivery of lines in a well-produced play. I tried to see the sister I grew up with, the one who scraped her knee falling out of a tree and cried in my arms, but she was gone. In her place was a stranger in a white dress, a beautiful polished product of my mother's design. She promised to love, honor, and cherish a man who represented everything I had rejected, and as she said, "I do," I felt a final quiet closing of a door between us. The sister I knew was now just a memory, and this woman was a part of their world, not mine. Throughout the entire ceremony, I could feel my mother's gaze burning into the side of my head. I never turned to look at her, but I didn't have to. I knew that look. It was a look of pure, concentrated fury, a silent, relentless pressure meant to make me crack, to make me get up and leave in shame. But I just sat there, my spine straight against the back of the chair, my hands resting calmly on my knees. I focused on the officiant, on the flicker of the candles at the altar, on anything but her. It became a battle of wills waged in complete silence. She was trying to break me with her contempt, and I was refusing to be broken. Every second I remained in that seat, calm and composed in my uniform, was a small victory. It wasn't about defiance anymore. It was about survival. It was about proving to myself that her opinion of me was just noise, not the truth. When the officiant finally said, "You may kiss the bride," a wave of polite, perfectly timed applause washed through the tent. It sounded thin and hollow to my ears. I clapped along with everyone else, my hands moving mechanically, but my heart wasn't in it. As the happy couple turned to face their audience, beaming with practiced joy, I saw my father in the front row. He was dabbing at his eyes with a handkerchief, a picture of paternal emotion, but it felt as fake as the rest of it. He was playing his part, just like everyone else. This wasn't a family celebrating a union. It was a corporation celebrating a successful merger. Olivia had secured the right partner, the family legacy was safe, and the stock price was about to go up. The kiss wasn't a seal of love, it was the signing of a contract. They walked back down the aisle, a triumphant procession through a sea of smiling faces. As Olivia passed my row, her eyes deliberately slid past me, refusing to connect. The flicker of guilt I'd seen before was gone, replaced by a cool, bridal detachment. She was now Mrs. Michael Davenport, and the inconvenient brother in the military uniform no longer registered on her radar. I stayed in my seat as the guests began to shuffle out, the air buzzing with chatter about the ceremony and the reception to come. I let the crowd thin out, not wanting to be swept up in the tide of insincere congratulations. I needed a moment to brace myself for the next act of this play, the part where the masks would be loosened by champagne and the polite fictions would start to fray at the edges. The reception was where the real battles would be fought. Finally, I stood and made my way toward the reception area, which was in an even larger, more extravagantly decorated tent on the other side of the grand lawn. A full band was already playing a smooth jazz number, and the sound of laughter and clinking glasses filled the air. Waiters in starched white jackets moved through the crowd with silver trays held high, offering champagne and canapés that probably cost more than my weekly grocery bill. The sheer scale of the wealth on display was staggering. It wasn't just luxury. It was a statement of power, a declaration that they were a class apart. I felt like I had stepped onto a different planet. My uniform, a source of immense pride everywhere else in my life, felt like a cheap costume in this cathedral of money. I was a stray dog that had wandered into a country club banquet. I had barely taken 2 steps inside when I was intercepted by my Aunt Carol, my mother's younger sister. She had the same sharp features as my mother, but coated them in a syrupy sweet smile. "Ryan, darling," she cooed, air-kissing the space near my cheek. "I was so surprised to see you here. We weren't sure you'd be able to get away from your duties." The slight pause before the word duties was a masterful little dig, implying my job was an inconvenient chore that kept me from important family events like this. "You look so handsome in your little outfit," she added, her eyes doing a quick, dismissive sweep of my uniform. "It must be so rewarding to do what you do, so simple." She patted my arm, her smile never wavering, and then drifted away, leaving the insult to hang in the air like cheap perfume. My eyes scanned the crowd, searching for a friendly face, but there were none to be found. I saw my father holding court with a group of men in expensive suits, all of them laughing at something he'd said. He was in his element, the confident patriarch, the master of his universe. Our eyes met across the crowded tent for a split second. The shame I'd seen earlier was completely gone. In its place was a look of pure, unadulterated panic. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head, a clear signal. "Stay away. Don't come over here. Don't disrupt this." Then he turned, his back on me, physically turning away to re-engage with his conversation, leaving me standing alone in the middle of the room. He had made his choice. He chose his business partners, his social standing, his comfortable life. He chose them over his own son. The finality of that gesture was like a punch to the gut. I needed air. The tent, with its overpowering scent of flowers and perfume, suddenly felt suffocating. I made my way through the throng of guests, ignoring the curious glances and whispered comments, and slipped out onto a stone terrace that overlooked the river. The evening air was cool and clean. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Down below, a few sailboats drifted lazily on the Potomac. For a few minutes there was peace. I leaned against the stone balustrade and just breathed. This was their world, a world of manicured lawns and waterfront views, of effortless power and casual cruelty, a world where a son's honor meant less than a well-timed stock tip. I had never felt more alone, more disconnected from the people who were supposed to be my family. I wasn't just an outsider, I was an alien. As I stood there, lost in thought, I noticed a subtle shift in the energy at the party's entrance. The stream of arriving guests had momentarily paused. A single, nondescript black sedan, a government vehicle, not a luxury car, had pulled up to the valet stand. A driver in a simple dark suit got out and opened the rear passenger door. An older man emerged. He was tall and lean, with a full head of silver hair and a posture that radiated an authority that had nothing to do with money. He wore a simple, well-tailored navy blue suit, but he moved with the unmistakable economy of motion of a lifelong military man. My heart skipped a beat. It was Admiral Hayes, my mentor, the man who had shaped my career and in many ways my character. What on earth was he doing here? He handed a small gift to an attendant, and then his eyes began to scan the area, clearly looking for someone. He bypassed the main flow of guests heading into the tent, his gaze sweeping over the lawn and the terrace. Then his eyes found me. A broad, genuine smile lit up his face, a smile of pure, unreserved warmth and respect. He raised a hand in greeting and, without a moment's hesitation, started walking directly toward me. He ignored my father, who was standing just a few yards away. He walked past my mother, who was greeting some new arrivals. He cut a straight path across the perfectly manicured lawn, his focus entirely on me. In that moment, the entire dynamic of the evening began to shift. The most powerful man at the party wasn't heading for the bride or the groom or their wealthy parents. He was coming for the embarrassment. He was coming for me. The Admiral's presence was like a sudden shift in atmospheric pressure. The background noise of the party, the clinking glasses, the forced laughter, the smooth jazz, seemed to recede, becoming a distant, unimportant hum. He walked with a purpose that made everyone else look like they were just drifting. As he got closer, I could see the lines of experience etched around his eyes, the quiet confidence that came not from a fat bank account, but from decades of making life-or-death decisions. He wasn't just a guest. He was an event. People started to notice. Conversations faltered as heads turned. The subtle but unmistakable ripple of curiosity and deference began to spread through the crowd. Who was this man, and why was he making a beeline for the family's black sheep? My mother saw him, of course. She missed nothing. Her eyes, which had been scanning the party with the predatory focus of a hawk, locked onto the Admiral. I saw a flicker of confusion in her expression. This man didn't fit. He wasn't one of their circle of bankers, lawyers, or real estate tycoons. He didn't carry the soft, easy posture of inherited wealth. He was something else entirely, something she couldn't immediately categorize and therefore couldn't control. Her hostess smile tightened at the edges as she saw him heading directly for me. Her instinct, as always, was to manage the anomaly. She immediately began to glide in our direction, a silken shark moving through shallow water, ready to intercept, to co-opt, to take control of this unexpected variable and bend it to the narrative of her perfect day. My father noticed him too. He was in the middle of a story, with a group of men who all had the same expensive haircut and the same predatory smile. His laughter died in his throat. I saw his eyes widen almost imperceptibly, as he recognized the Admiral not personally but by reputation. Admiral Hayes was a name that occasionally appeared in the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post, usually in articles about global security or defense policy. He was a man who advised presidents, a man whose influence operated on a global stage. This was a form of power my father understood and respected, a power completely independent of the stock market. His face became a mask of sudden, urgent cordiality as he excused himself from his friends, his confident stride now looking more like a nervous scuttle as he hurried to join us. The Admiral reached me and clasped my hand in a firm, dry grip. His eyes, a clear, piercing blue, were filled with a genuine warmth that felt like a physical shield. "Ryan," he said, his voice a calm baritone that cut through the surrounding chatter without being loud. "I wouldn't have missed this for the world. I apologize for my tardiness. A briefing at the Pentagon ran long." He said it simply, a statement of fact, not an excuse. He looked at me, and only me, his focus absolute. In that moment, with his hand on my shoulder, I felt a lifetime of my family's quiet dismissals and loud insults simply evaporate. His respect was a fortress, and for the first time all day I felt completely safe. He hadn't just greeted me. He had validated my entire existence in front of the very people who had tried to erase it. My mother arrived, her society smile locked in place, her eyes darting between me and the Admiral, trying to solve the puzzle. "Admiral," she purred, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "Catherine Wallace. We are so very honored to have you join us for Olivia's special day." She was trying to absorb him into her orbit, to make his presence about her party. The Admiral turned to her, his own smile polite but devoid of any warmth. He shook her hand briefly. "Ma'am," he said, his tone formal and clipped, "I'm here for Lieutenant Wallace. In my 35 years of service, I have not had the privilege to command a finer, more honorable officer." Then, with a finality that was breathtaking in its social brutality, he turned his back on her, returning his full attention to me. The snub was so clean, so precise, it was like a surgical incision. She was left standing there, her hand frozen in the air for a half-second too long. My father scurried up, his face flushed, trying desperately to salvage the situation. "Admiral Hayes, a tremendous pleasure. Robert Wallace." He stuck out his hand, trying to project an air of casual familiarity, as if he hobnobbed with four-star admirals every day. "We're all so grateful for the work you do keeping this country safe. I was just telling Senator Albright the other day." He was trying to name-drop, to find some common ground in the world of DC power brokers. The Admiral gave him a curt nod but cut him off. "Your son is the one doing the work. Mr. Wallace. He leads his team with a courage you can't teach at Harvard Business School." Every word was a quiet grenade tossed directly into my father's world of privilege and prestige. He was drawing a line in the sand, separating my world of earned honor from their world of inherited status, and he was making it clear which side he stood on. Just then, the band inside the tent finished their song. In the sudden quiet that followed, a voice cut through the air. It was the wedding officiant, a man I now recognized as Chaplain Miller, a retired Navy captain and a close friend of the Admiral. He was standing on the stage, microphone in hand, a broad, knowing smile on his face. He had seen the Admiral arrive. He was supposed to be introducing the bride and groom for their first dance, but he had a different announcement to make. He raised a hand, and the low buzz of conversation in the massive tent immediately died down. "Ladies and gentlemen, your attention, please," he said, his voice calm but authoritative. Everyone turned to face the stage, their faces a mixture of curiosity and anticipation. "Before we continue with the scheduled festivities," the chaplain continued, his voice now filling the entire space, resonating with a deep, sincere gravity that was completely at odds with the light, frivolous atmosphere of the party. "Could I please ask you all to rise?" A wave of confused murmuring swept through the crowd. Guests exchanged puzzled glances. Rising for what? This wasn't part of the program. I saw my sister and her new husband, Michael, standing near the dance floor looking utterly bewildered. They were no longer the center of attention. Something else was happening, something bigger than their perfectly choreographed celebration. The entire script for the evening had just been thrown out. Then the chaplain's voice boomed from the speakers, imbued with a tone of profound respect that demanded to be obeyed. "We are graced this evening by the presence of a distinguished guest. a man of great honor and service to our nation. Ladies and gentlemen, please show your respect. The Admiral has arrived. He didn't use his name. He didn't need to. He said the Admiral, a title that resonated with a power that transcended wealth. It was a title earned through decades of sacrifice, leadership, and unwavering integrity. It was a currency that made the millions of dollars spent on this wedding seem cheap and insignificant by comparison. The reaction was immediate and electric. A wave of motion swept through the tent as, row by row, the guests got to their feet. These were powerful people, CEOs, politicians, judges, and they rose without hesitation, driven by an ingrained understanding of a hierarchy that had nothing to do with their net worth. Their eyes, hundreds of pairs of them, were all fixed on the terrace, on the Admiral, and by extension on me. I saw my Uncle Frank, who had mocked my little Navy adventure, scramble to his feet, his face a comical mask of confusion and awe. I saw the guests who had snickered at my mother's insult, now standing at rigid attention. I saw my sister, her perfect bridal smile completely gone, replaced by a look of sheer uncomprehending shock. For the first time, they were all seeing me not as Catherine's embarrassing son, but as a man honored by a giant. And then, my gaze found my mother. She was standing just a few feet away, frozen in place, a half-full flute of champagne in her hand. As the full weight of the moment landed on her, the entire room standing, not for her, not for her daughter, but for the man honoring the son she had just disowned, she made a small, choking sound. The champagne sloshed over the rim of the crystal flute, spilling down the front of her designer gown. Her face, which had been a mask of smug control all day, completely crumbled. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving behind a pale, waxy sheen of pure, unadulterated shock. The world she had so carefully constructed, a world where she was queen and her judgment was law, had just been publicly and irrevocably shattered. Her cruel words, spoken with such confidence just an hour before, now hung in the air, utterly meaningless. My uniform was no longer an embarrassment. In the silent, astonished eyes of everyone present, it had become a symbol of an honor she could never touch. The Admiral didn't stay long. He wasn't there for the party. He was there for me. We talked for a few minutes on the terrace, away from the stunned silence of the tent. He asked about my next deployment, about my team, about the real things that mattered in my life. He never once mentioned my family or the scene he had just walked into. He didn't have to. His presence was the only commentary necessary. When he was ready to leave, he shook my hand firmly, looked me dead in the eye and said, "Keep making us proud, son." Then he was gone, leaving a crater in the middle of my mother's perfectly planned universe. I stood there for a moment, the cool night air on my face, and I knew I was leaving too. There was nothing left for me here. The battle was over, and I hadn't even had to fire a shot. My father tried to intercept me as I walked back toward the valet stand. His face was a mess of conflicting emotions, panic, a desperate desire to please, and a flicker of something that might have been pride, years too late. "Ryan, wait," he said, his voice a little shaky. "Don't rush off. Let's get a drink." He gestured vaguely toward the bar inside the tent, a place that now felt like a foreign country. I just looked at him, at the expensive suit that suddenly seemed too big for him, at the Rolex on his wrist that now looked like a prop. "I have to go," I said, my voice calm and even. There was no anger left, just a profound hollow emptiness. He opened his mouth to say something else, but no words came out. He just nodded, defeated. He knew, just as I did, that a line had been crossed that we could never go back over. I didn't see my mother again before I left. I caught a glimpse of her as I passed the entrance to the tent. She was surrounded by a few of her closest friends, who were fussing over her, dabbing at the wine stain on her dress with a napkin. Her back was rigid, her face turned away from the crowd, a mask of cold fury. She was a general whose fortress had been breached by an unexpected force, and she was in full retreat. We didn't make eye contact. I don't think she could have looked at me in that moment. To do so would be to acknowledge her defeat, to admit that the son she had called an embarrassment had just become the most respected man at her daughter's wedding. Her silence was louder than any insult she had ever thrown at me. It was the sound of her power crumbling into dust. My walk to the valet stand was the loneliest, most liberating walk of my life. The guests parted for me like I was Moses, and they were the Red Sea. The whispers that followed me now weren't of pity or mockery. They were of awe and confusion. I was a puzzle they couldn't solve. I saw my sister Olivia, standing with Michael near the gift table. She looked pale, her bridal glow completely gone. Our eyes met, and in her gaze I saw the full weight of her choice. She had chosen the perfect wedding, the wealthy husband, the approval of our parents, and in doing so she had lost her brother. There was no anger in my heart for her, only a deep, profound sadness for the little girl who used to be my best friend. I gave her a small final nod, and then I turned and walked away, leaving her to her perfect, empty celebration. About a month later, a small, heavily insured package arrived at my apartment near the base. There was no return address, but I knew who it was from. Inside, nestled in a velvet box, was my father's Rolex Submariner. There was no note, no card, no explanation, just the watch. It was a silent, unconditional surrender, a peace offering from a man who didn't have the courage to speak the words himself. I picked it up. It was heavy, a solid piece of machinery and history, but it felt cold, alien. It wasn't my legacy. I never wore it. I put it in a safe deposit box at my bank, and there it has remained ever since. It's not a trophy of victory. It's a tombstone for a relationship that died, a reminder that some things, once broken, can never be truly fixed, no matter how much they're worth. My relationship with my mother never recovered. In fact, there was nothing left to recover. We entered into a new phase of our lives, a sort of Cold War of politeness. We speak on birthdays and major holidays. The calls are short. The topics are safe: the weather, my health, the stock market. She never mentioned the wedding again. She never apologized. But she also never again questioned my career or my life choices. The word embarrassment was permanently retired from her vocabulary when it came to me. She didn't respect my life, but she was forced to respect the power and honor that came with it, a power that had publicly dwarfed her own. We were family in name only, two strangers connected by blood and a wound that would never heal. Olivia and I tried. We really did. She called me a few times after her honeymoon, her voice full of a forced cheerfulness that neither of us believed. We had a stilted lunch a few months later, where we talked about everything and nothing, but the ghost of her wedding day sat between us, a silent, disapproving guest at the table. We had been raised in the same house, but we had become citizens of different countries, and we no longer spoke the same language. Her world was one of charity galas and weekend trips to the Hamptons. Mine was one of early morning drills and the quiet, heavy responsibility for the lives of the men and women under my command. Eventually, the calls became less frequent, and the texts became shorter. We settled into the quiet, sad rhythm of being family, who only see each other at funerals. As for me, I found a kind of peace. The approval I had spent my entire life chasing, I realized I never actually needed. My worth wasn't something they could grant or withhold. It was something I had built myself, far away from their world of manicured lawns and inherited privilege. My family was the team I served with, the men and women who trusted me with their lives. My legacy wasn't a vintage watch locked away in a vault. It was in the respect I earned every single day. I didn't win my family's love that night, but I won something far more valuable, myself. I was finally free from the weight of their judgment, free to be the man I was always meant to be on my own terms. That night at the wedding wasn't a victory parade. It was an emancipation. I didn't destroy their world. I simply walked out of it. I left them to their champagne, their luxury cars, and their silent, bitter resentments. I chose a different path, one defined not by wealth but by duty, honor, and a quiet, unshakable sense of self. They continued to live in their gilded cage, while I learned how to fly. And some nights, when I'm standing on the deck of a ship looking out at the vast, dark ocean under a canopy of stars, I think about that night, and I don't feel anger or sadness. I just feel a quiet, profound gratitude that I had the strength to walk away and find a world where my uniform wasn't an embarrassment, but a crown. If you know someone who needs to hear this message of self-confidence, please share this video with them. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about finding your own path, even when it's not what others expect. Thank you for listening. Looking back, I learned that the word family has very little to do with blood and everything to do with respect. For years, I thought my family was a fortress I was locked out of, but I eventually realized it was a cage I was lucky to escape. We all have two families in this life, the one we are born into and the one we build. The one you build is founded on shared values, on mutual support, on people who see your light and don't try to dim it. It's your team, your crew, your circle of friends who become brothers and sisters. If you're fighting to be seen by people who refuse to open their eyes, maybe it's time to stop fighting that battle and start looking for the people who already see you for who you are. Your real family is out there waiting for you. I also learned that seeking approval from someone who is determined to withhold it is a kind of prison. You spend your life running on a treadmill, thinking if you just run a little faster, a little longer, you'll finally reach the destination of their acceptance. But the truth is, the finish line keeps moving. The only way to win that race is to stop running. The moment you step off that treadmill and stand still in your own truth, you realize you weren't running toward anything worthwhile. You were just running away from yourself. The most powerful thing you can ever do is to stop asking for permission to be who you are. Your value isn't a stock that goes up or down based on someone else's opinion. It's a fixed asset, and you are the only one who gets to set its price. That night taught me the profound difference between wealth and honor. My family had wealth. They had the sprawling estate, the German cars, the Rolex that was meant to be a crown. They had all the symbols of success, but they were morally bankrupt. Honor, I learned, is a different kind of currency. It can't be inherited and it can't be bought. It's earned in silence, in the early mornings when no one is watching, in the difficult choices you make when integrity is on the line. The Admiral didn't walk into that party with a heavy wallet. He walked in with a heavy presence, one built on decades of service and character. And in an instant, his brand of currency made all their money look like cheap paper. Never confuse the noise of wealth with the weight of honor. The greatest lesson, perhaps, was in the power of quiet dignity. I could have made a scene. I could have yelled, argued, and exposed my mother's cruelty for all to hear. But what would that have accomplished? It would have dragged me down to her level. It would have proven her right, that I was an embarrassment, incapable of handling myself in her world. Instead, I chose to be a quiet, unmovable rock in the middle of her storm. Your character is never more on display than when you are being disrespected. Responding with grace, with calm, with an unwavering sense of your own worth, that is a language that even your harshest critics can't ignore. It tells them, without you ever having to say a word, that their judgment has no power over you. You have to understand that sometimes the happy ending isn't everyone coming together and hugging it out. Sometimes the happy ending is you walking away alone but whole. I never got an apology from my mother, and my relationship with my sister faded into a collection of polite, distant memories. And I'm okay with that. True closure doesn't always come from getting the last word or a heartfelt apology. True closure is an internal transaction. It's accepting that you can't change them, but you can change how much space they occupy in your heart and your head. It's about giving yourself the peace that they never will. Letting go isn't giving up. It's making room for something better. Ultimately, what saved me was finding my own North Star. For years, my family's approval was my compass, and it consistently led me into storms of self-doubt and humiliation. My North Star became my service, the uniform, the values of duty and honor that were so alien to their world. It was a fixed point in the sky that I could navigate by, no matter how chaotic the waters around me became. You have to find your own. It could be your passion, your faith, your principles, your commitment to your own small corner of the world. Whatever it is, hold on to it. When the people who are supposed to guide you try to lead you astray, that North Star is the only thing that will bring you home to yourself. So, if you take one thing away from my story, let it be this. Your life is your story to write. Don't ever hand the pen to someone who is only going to write you in as a villain or a footnote. You are the main character. You decide what your worth is. You decide what honor means. You decide who gets a seat at your table. It's not an easy path, especially when it means walking away from the people you thought you were supposed to walk with. But I promise you, the freedom you'll find on the other side is worth every single difficult step it takes to get there. Your true legacy isn't what you're given. It's what you build from the ground up, with your own two hands.